What's up everybody, thanks for checking out the video. I'm Luke, this is the SubaruONLY Channel. It's a channel where all we do is Subaru builds and race Subaru vehicles at motorsport events. It's a DIY themed channel where I walk you guys through how to work on your Subarus and hopefully get you guys on the racetrack to do a little racing of your own. In today's video, as you can probably tell, we're putting a new timing belt, we're putting a new hydraulic tensioner, and all the associated pulleys on the 2.5 liter Subaru Forester engine that I'm doing a build series on. Let's get these sweet parts installed on that motor.
Okay, here's a kit that I'll be installing in this 2.5 liter Forester motor. It's a Gates timing belt kit. It includes all the pulleys, the hydraulic tensioner, and the timing belt, and some Loctite. Yes, 2 of the pulleys and the hydraulic tensioner are made in China. 1 of the pulleys is made in Japan, and the belt is made in the USA. The kit also comes with some documentation, basically a limited warranty, and a technical service bulletin that has to do with that timing belt shield, instructions for installing the timing belt, and this bright yellow sheet that is all about bleeding that hydraulic tensioner before you install it. And I'm going to walk you guys through how I do that in just a second. Now I know which timing belt kit people use is very controversial. It's probably as controversial as which oil you use, but I have had good luck with these Gates, and although some of these components are made in China and I'm not a big fan of that, I'm going to go ahead and use this kit and I'm going to keep a very close eye on it. Because frankly, I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence directly correlating these China manufactured parts with failures on engines. And I'd like to see firsthand for myself how they last.
Before I install any of these components, I need to bleed this hydraulic tensioner. Basically that yellow sheet of paper that came with the kit, this one right here, explains how you do this procedure. It's pretty straightforward. I'll walk you guys through it right now. Basically what those instructions say is that air gets trapped in the system and you need to bleed that air before you put it on the engine. To bleed that air, you mount this vertically so that the piston is facing up and the air is on top. You then secure it in a vise, and I'm going to show you how I do it in my vise, and then you slowly release the piston and compress the piston 3 times, taking at least 60 seconds for each cycle. Okay, I'm going to walk you guys through bleeding the sucker right now. Okay, so here's how I bleed the air out of these hydraulic tensioners. Basically, I just use an everyday bench vise, but I tip it on its side and I set it on my workbench, as you can see here. Now with these tensioners, remember you need to keep it vertical. Once it's secured in the vise, you can pull the pin, and then we'll slowly raise the vise to allow this rod to extend, taking approximately 60 seconds, and then we'll compress that rod, taking a full 60 seconds, with a slow, even rate of compression. Okay, once you've set it in your vise, you want to make sure that that rod is lined up so that when it extends and compresses, it's going parallel to its piston bore. And then proceed and slowly extend that rod, taking a full 60 seconds. What I've found is that I basically turn this handle similar to a second hand on a clock. 1001, 1002, 1006, 1007, 1008. Once you've felt that the piston is fully extended, begin your compression cycle, applying slow, even force, taking at least 60 seconds to compress it. Periodically check to make sure that rod is being compressed perfectly parallel to the bore. One kind of real-world observation I'll share with you guys is that as you're compressing this tensioner, you can actually feel the fluid is moving in this tensioner. Because as I'm rotating this handle, I can slowly feel the tension changing in this handle as the fluid is moving, and I can really feel how slowly I need to be moving to allow all that fluid to pass from one chamber to the next chamber and allow that rod to slowly move down. You really can feel it in the handle. Okay, I've done 2 extension and compression strokes of this rod. Before I do a third one, I'm going to let you guys know a quick little tip that I found that really helps. A lot of times when I've compressed this rod and it's totally flat, meaning so that the vise is flush on the outer surface and that rod is all the way down, for some reason that rod just isn't quite far enough for this pin to go through the first hole, through the rod, and through that second hole, and I'm always binding up trying to get to that second hole. So my quick tip is fold up a teeny little piece of tape, like a little piece of duct tape, really thin, and just put it on top of that rod. Because it's got that adhesive, it'll stick, and I mean a fraction of a millimeter thick. You don't want to over compress this rod. You just want to compress that rod a teeny bit more than the outer surface so that this pin will pass through the first hole, the rod, and the second hole easily. Put that little tape on, put it back in your vise, make sure it's lined up properly, and I'm going to go ahead and do the final compression stroke. Okay, that rod is fully compressed, and because I put that teeny little piece of tape, I'm hoping this pin slides through the first hole, the rod, and the third hole easily. Another little quick tip is that when you put this pin in, make sure you're thinking about the orientation of this hydraulic tensioner with respect to how you're going to install it, because you're going to be leaving this pin in that sucker as you install in the engine, and you need to pull this pin out after it's bolted in. So think about which side you're installing this pin. Alright, and that pin in went perfect. Remember, you're going to be bolting this in the engine, so don't push that pin in too far. Just push it in far enough so it goes through the first hole, the rod, and the second hole. And then slowly release. And bam! This hydraulic tensioner is fully bled and it's ready to be installed in the motor. There's no other prep work for any of the other pulleys, so we're ready to install all the components of this timing kit on the motor.
Okay, here's the motor that I'll be installing this timing belt kit on. It's a motor from a 2000 Subaru Forester. It's a 2.5 liter single overhead cam motor, and it had a bad head gasket. I'm actually doing a build series on replacing the head gaskets on this motor. So if you'd like to see any of the steps involved in rebuilding this motor, check out some of my older videos where I walk you through all the critical steps. Now I've already bled this hydraulic tensioner, so it's ready to be installed, and so are all the other pulleys. However, before I put all these parts on, I actually need to tighten the bolts in these camshaft sprockets. I'm going to walk you guys through a great little hack to tighten these bolts on these camshaft sprockets without using those specialty factory tools. Okay, so here's the hack. To tighten or loosen any of these camshaft sprocket bolts, all you need is an old timing belt and a couple pairs of vice grips, preferably these flat needle nose style. Okay, the first step is thinking about which way you need to rotate this bolt. If you're tightening the bolt down, and the OEM specs for torque on these bolts is 58 foot-pounds, so you're going to need to tighten it quite a bit. If you're tightening this bolt, it's actually going to rotate clockwise, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, so it'll rotate this way. And as you tighten this bolt, you're actually pulling tension on the lower portion of this belt because you're rotating this camshaft clockwise. Step 2 is routing this old timing belt around the camshaft sprocket that you're going to loosen or tighten that bolt on. Wrap it around nice and snug with all the teeth engaged. Then grab yourself something like a little binder clip to temporarily hold this sucker. Next, we're going to route the rest of the belt around any other fixed point on this pulley system, preferably this cogged pulley that we're actually going to be replacing, so it doesn't matter if we put a little bit of load on it. Then grab another binder clip and temporarily hold the belt with that binder clip. Okay, as you can see, I've wrapped that old timing belt around the camshaft sprocket that I'm going to tighten that bolt on. The idea is, since I'm going to be pulling tension on the bottom of that belt because I'm rotating that bolt clockwise to tighten it, I want to bind up the bottom of that belt so it can't move. And the way that I achieve that is I wrap this belt around another fixed point on the engine and then clamp it so that that belt isn't allowed to rotate. It may sound kind of confusing, but if you walk through each of these steps, it'll work out perfectly each time. Now the way I have it set up, when I replace these binder clips with needle nose pliers, it's going to prevent this timing belt from rotating at all when I try to turn this bolt on this camshaft sprocket. And it's going to allow me to torque this bolt all the way down to 58 foot-pounds. Let's go ahead and do it right now. Okay, I've replaced those binder clips with vice grips, and I'm ready to torque this bolt down to 58 foot-pounds. Of course, to do that, you got to use a torque wrench, and that's what I've got right here. And this bolt is torqued to 58 foot-pounds. Awesome. Now if you need to, go ahead and do the other side. And if you need to take out any of these bolts, just do this whole configuration in the opposite way. And that works perfect to loosen these bolts and take them out, so you can remove the camshaft pulleys. Okay, the next step is simple. We just remove all these old pulleys and slap the new ones on and torque them to specs. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Okay, the first thing we're going to install is that new hydraulic tensioner that we bled earlier. Now the bolt for this hydraulic tensioner gets torqued down to 28 foot-pounds, and as a matter of fact, all the bolts for the pulleys in this timing belt kit get torqued down to 28 foot-pounds. Also, when you're finally ready to install these components, use a little bit of that blue Loctite that they include in the kit and put just 1 or 2 drops on the end of that bolt thread. And that'll make sure these bolts never back out. Now that we're installing this hydraulic tensioner, you'll see why we had to put this pin in a specific orientation to allow us to remove it once it was installed. And then go ahead and torque that bolt down to 28 foot-pounds. Okay, that tensioner is bolted to spec, but don't pull that pin yet. We have to wait until we have the belt installed before you can pull that sucker. Okay, after that hydraulic tensioner is installed, we'll go ahead and install that upper double bearing pulley and tighten that bolt to 28 foot-pounds. All right, that pulley's good to go. The next pulley you'd want to install would be this cog pulley, but don't install this pulley yet. It's going to be too hard to get the belt on if this pulley's already installed. So hold off installing this pulley until we have the belt routed around all these other pulleys. And then we'll put this cog pulley in as we mesh it with the teeth of that timing belt. All right, at this point, we're ready to grab that new timing belt and start routing it around the pulleys on the engine. A quick little tool hack I'll mention is grabbing some of these little binder clips from your local office supply store. Get these 1/2-inch size binder clips. They work perfect for temporarily holding that belt while you're routing it around all the other pulleys. Okay, before you put this timing belt on, the first thing you should be thinking about is what the hell we're timing here. We're not talking about ignition timing. We're talking about camshaft and valve timing. We're talking about making sure that those camshafts, which control those valves opening, are synced with the rotation of the crankshaft so that those valves open at the exact right time with respect to the piston in that combustion chamber. That's what this timing belt's all about, and that's what the word timing is referring to in this context. So to achieve that, we need to align both these camshafts to this crankshaft, and Subaru, being a great engineering company, has taken all the hard work out of this for us. What they've done is they've marked these camshaft sprockets to make it super easy to make sure that these camshafts are phased to that crankshaft correctly. Basically, they put a little hash mark in these camshaft sprockets, and all you need to do is make sure that that hash mark is straight up in the 12 o'clock vertical position for both camshafts before you put this timing belt on. When it comes to the crankshaft, on the back of that crankshaft cog, there's also a mark that you align straight up in the vertical 12 noon position. That mark will line up with the two block case halves. Once you have all three of these aligned in the straight up vertical position, you're ready to start routing your timing belt. Okay, now I have the belt partially installed on the engine, and I want to show you guys two things. I want to show you guys how the belt routes on these pulleys, and I want to show you where we use these binder clips. The first thing is how this belt routes. Basically, it goes around this passenger side camshaft sprocket, goes under this double pulley, and then wraps over your crankshaft cog, and then back under this hydraulic tensioner pulley, and then again over that camshaft sprocket on the driver's side. Having the timing belt routed this way around the crankshaft sprocket allows for the maximum surface area and number of teeth engaging, which is critical because all the torque from this engine is being applied to this timing belt through that crankshaft sprocket. So that's why we want to get as much contact with that sprocket to help transfer all that rotational force to that belt. Okay, the second thing I wanted to show you is why I use these binder clips. These binder clips are perfect to temporarily clip that timing belt to that camshaft sprocket. So you use this binder clip to hold that timing belt on that first camshaft sprocket while you route the timing belt around all the other pulleys and the other camshaft sprocket. I'll also mention that these timing belts have little white marks on them to help you align them on those camshaft sprockets. I'll show you a little close-up so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Here's a closer look at that white mark that's stamped into those timing belts. These marks help you make sure that that timing belt is installed and is meshing at the right location on these teeth. Here's that white mark on the timing belt for the crankshaft pulley. And then here's that white mark on the timing belt on the left camshaft sprocket. Okay, I have the belt routed on the engine and it's making contact with all the teeth at the exact right position so that the mark on those camshaft sprockets is straight up and everything's in sync. Now I'll go ahead and install that cog pulley and start putting some tension on this timing belt. It's a little tricky, but basically you get those belt teeth engaged in this cog pulley and then lead with that bolt to start threading on that bolt and installing the pulley with that timing belt already meshed with the gear. And then make sure you torque that sucker down to 28 foot-pounds. All right, ready for our last pulley. That's a single bearing pulley that goes on the bottom. Now again, this one's a little bit tricky. It's gonna have a little bit of tension on it, but basically lead with that bolt and then use the leverage of the bolt to kind of twist that pulley up to get it lined up so that you thread the bolt in straight and you don't cross thread anything. Take your time and it'll work out just fine. You'll know when that bolt grabs those threads and it's threading on straight. And then of course, don't forget to torque it to 28 foot-pounds. At this point, we're all good. I'll remove these binder clips. I'll double check that everything is aligned perfectly before I pull that pin from that hydraulic tensioner. All right, I've double checked that everything's aligned correctly, and it is. This timing belt kit is done. I'm going to button up this engine and get ready to drop it in the Forester and wrap up this entire engine build. The only thing left to do now is make sure you don't forget to pull that pin out of that hydraulic tensioner. This is always the fun part. And bam, you pull the pin out, nothing blew up.
Alright, I'm going to wrap it up there for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. In this video, we installed a new Gates timing belt kit. That includes a new timing belt, the pulleys, and the hydraulic tensioner. I walked you guys through the correct steps for installing that timing belt and how you align the camshafts to that crankshaft position and how critical that is for the installation. I also walked you guys through how we bleed all the air out of that hydraulic tensioner before we install it on the motor. With this new timing belt kit and the new head gaskets that this engine has, this 2.5 liter Subaru Forester motor is going to be good to go for many, many years to come. And now, this motor is all ready to be dropped back in the car. I'm Luke, this is a SubaruONLY channel. If you enjoyed this video, if you thought it brought you value, please consider subscribing. That would be awesome. If you have any thoughts or questions about this video, please leave a comment and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for checking out the video, guys. I'll see you next time. Later.